The Galactic Unity Council gathered in the heart of the Andromeda Citadel, an imposing structure that represented the vastness and complexity of the galaxy. Aliens from hundreds of worlds, each with their unique technology, culture, and knowledge, gathered to present their contributions to the galaxy. It was a grand event, with starships from all corners of the galaxy landing one by one, each carrying something extraordinary. The air was filled with excitement and a sense of superiority as each species showed off their most impressive advancements. But when Earth arrived, there was little excitement. The human delegation, a small group of diplomats and scientists, stepped forward with nothing more than a transparent glass dome in their hands. Inside the dome was a simple plant, its green leaves barely moving in the gentle artificial breeze. It looked utterly unremarkable, a mere speck of life in a galaxy filled with wonders. The other species exchanged curious glances, some snickering, others outright laughing. "Is this Earth's contribution? A plant?" one of the Zortok leaders asked, his voice dripping with amusement. The gathered aliens laughed, but it was the Varnax, one of the oldest and most technologically advanced species, who took a more studied interest in the plant. They were a race known for their meticulous nature, always looking for hidden secrets and things others might overlook. The plant seemed strange to them. It had no extraordinary colors, no odd shapes or sizes, just simple, green leaves and thin tendrils. Yet something about it felt different, almost like it was waiting for something, waiting to be understood. Despite the curiosity of a few, the majority of the council dismissed the Earth plant as nothing more than a joke. They were all about speed, power, and intelligence. How could something so simple, so organic, possibly compete with the advancements they had made over centuries? As the laughing died down, a human scientist, Dr. Sarah Freeman, spoke calmly, her voice steady despite the mockery surrounding her. This plant, Florivermis primus, was created through centuries of careful study on Earth. It's not just a plant. It's a living organism that can heal ecosystems, restore barren lands, and even purify air. It's not designed for war, but if it's misused, it can be far more powerful than you think. Her words hung in the air, but they were largely ignored. The Varnax archivist, however, remained silent, staring at the plant as if it were a puzzle. He had a sense of unease, a strange feeling that something wasn't quite right. But he didn't voice his concerns. There was no reason to believe that a simple Earth plant, no matter how unique, could pose a threat to the might of the galaxy. As the humans left the exhibition hall, the council members continued their celebrations, completely unbothered by the seemingly harmless gift from Earth. What they didn't know was that Dr. Freeman's words weren't just a warning. They were a glimpse of something much darker. The plant, Florivermis primus, had been created by human scientists with one goal in mind: to restore ecosystems on Earth. It had been tested in deserts, polluted regions, and barren lands, where it had turned dead soil into fertile ground. It had the ability to adapt, grow rapidly, and consume harmful toxins. But there was one thing the humans hadn't fully understood yet. The plant wasn't just a passive organism, it was a survivor. If it ever encountered an environment hostile to it, it would adapt in ways they couldn't yet predict. Weeks passed, and the plant was transported back to the Varnax Empire's homeworld for further study. The scientists there treated it as a curiosity, giving it a place in a controlled lab, far from any threats. But something strange began to happen. The plant's growth accelerated. The researchers initially thought it was the result of the artificial environment. Perhaps it was more suited to the Varnax atmosphere than they had anticipated. But as days passed, it became clear that the plant wasn't simply growing. It was adapting to its surroundings. It was responding to the presence of heat, light, and even sound. It seemed almost intelligent. One night, when the lab was quiet, the plant began to move. It was subtle at first, its tendrils reaching out ever so slightly, creeping along the floor and walls. The Varnax researchers had no idea what was happening until it was too late. By morning, The plant had spread across the entire lab, its roots burrowing into the floor and walls, feeding off the energy and materials around it. The containment system that was supposed to keep it locked away malfunctioned, and the plant escaped. At first, it was only in the lab, but soon it spread to the research facility's power supply, leaching energy to fuel its growth. The power grids began to fail, and then the plant began to grow into the nearby communication towers, shutting down the Varnax Empire's ability to contact other planets. The plant, now fully aware of its surroundings, didn't seem interested in anything other than expansion. It fed off everything it encountered, converting metal, plastics, and radiation into nutrients. The research facility's walls began to crumble as the plant grew thicker and more powerful. Within hours, the once advanced facility had been consumed by the very organism they had once considered harmless. The panic spread. The Varnax leadership sent soldiers to contain the threat, but by the time they arrived, it was already too late. The plant's tendrils had reached beyond the research complex, now moving into the surrounding city, and from there to the rest of the planet. The Varnax had no idea how to stop it. What had been intended as a simple botanical experiment had turned into a nightmare. The plant was no longer just Earth's creation. It had evolved into something far more dangerous. As the Varnax Empire fell into chaos, the Galactic Unity Council continued their celebrations, oblivious to the impending disaster. It wasn't until the first distress signal came through, a broken transmission from the Varnax, that the Council started to realize something was wrong. But even then, they didn't know what they were up against. The plants they had laughed at, the joke from Earth, were now the very reason the Varnax's once great empire was crumbling. By the time the truth reached the rest of the galaxy, it was too late. The plant had spread beyond Varnax, making its way to other worlds, growing and adapting to each new environment. What Earth had created as a solution for life had now become a force of destruction. And still, the Council refused to see the danger. They had mocked Earth's gift, underestimated its potential, and now, the entire galaxy would pay the price. The Varnax Empire had long prided itself on its technological advancements and scientific prowess. As one of the oldest and most powerful civilizations in the galaxy, they had built their cities to withstand anything: weather, radiation, even the harshest environments. But they had never anticipated a threat like Florivermis primus. What had once been an innocuous plant, dismissed as a joke by most of the galaxy, was now something much more dangerous, something beyond their understanding. The containment facility that housed the plant was state-of-the-art. Designed to hold the most dangerous life forms in the galaxy, it had thick walls, energy shields, and an advanced monitoring system. Nothing should have been able to escape from it. But as the days passed after the plant's arrival, the Varnax began to notice strange things. At first, it was small, minor glitches in the power grid, some equipment malfunctioning without explanation. The plant's growth, which had been steady but unremarkable, began to accelerate, its tendrils creeping beyond the boundaries of its glass dome. The scientists assumed it was simply adapting to its new environment. After all, Earth's climate and Varnax's were very different, but they had no idea how wrong they were. One evening, as the lab grew quieter and the last of the staff filed out for the night, a strange, almost imperceptible sound echoed through the walls of the containment facility. It was soft at first, like a low hum, followed by a faint rustling, like something stirring, waking up. The monitoring system blinked in and out, its screens flickering with strange interference. One of the scientists, a young Varnax named Hadric, was the last to leave the facility. He had been reviewing some readings when he noticed the strange sounds. He checked the monitors, but everything seemed fine. At least on the surface. The plant was still inside its dome, untouched. But something gnawed at him, a growing sense of unease that he couldn't shake. The next morning, the facility staff returned to find the first signs of trouble. The walls of the containment chamber were covered in strange marks, deep, jagged scratches, as if something had tried to claw its way out. Hadrick rushed to the control center, his heart pounding. The plant was still there, but the energy readings were off the charts. The tendrils had grown thicker, and the glass dome that had once held it securely was now cracked in several places. The plant had expanded beyond its containment zone, its roots snaking through the floor, reaching into the walls of the lab. It had broken free in the dead of night. A sense of panic spread through the facility as alarms began blaring. The containment breach had been confirmed. Hadrick rushed to the main control room, where the senior scientists gathered in a frantic discussion. "Seal the lab," one of them shouted. "Activate the containment protocols." But no one moved fast enough. The plant was already too far along, spreading through the facility at an alarming rate. The tendrils stretched out, wrapping around computers, power grids, and any metal they could reach. The walls, once so sturdy, were now weak under the plant's relentless growth. The vines were feeding off the electricity, growing stronger by the second. Hadrick could see it now. This wasn't just a plant. It was an organism that had learned to use everything around it, feeding off energy, adapting to the alien environment, and growing at an unnatural rate. By the time the emergency shutdown was initiated, it was too late. The power grid failed, and the facility's lights flickered, and then went out entirely. The plant's influence spread beyond the laboratory, taking over the entire building. The roots wrapped around pipes, cables, and metal supports, draining them of resources, feeding them into the ever-growing mass of green that now dominated the facility. Panic set in as the first few scientists realized the extent of the damage. "We need to evacuate," one of them screamed, but it was too late. The plant had already reached the exit doors, wrapping its tendrils around them, locking the building down. There was no way out. Outside the facility, the Varnak's military mobilized, sending ships and troops to help contain the breach. But when they arrived, they were greeted with an eerie silence. The complex that had once been a bustling center of scientific research was now completely still, its lights extinguished. The plant had overtaken everything, consuming the energy and leaving nothing behind. The Varnak soldiers approached cautiously, weapons raised, their eyes scanning the building for signs of movement. But there was no movement, only the creeping, silent growth of the plant. Inside, the last few surviving scientists fought to regain control. Hadrick and his team had managed to access one of the emergency exits, but the plant had anticipated this. The vines had already started to grow toward them, cutting off their escape routes. The scientists tried to fire on the plant with their energy weapons, but the beams bounced off the surface of the vines, as though the plant had developed an armor. They couldn't understand it. What was once a harmless organism had become a force to be reckoned with. The plant wasn't just alive, it was intelligent. It had learned from its surroundings, adapted to the Varnak's environment, and now it was fighting back. Desperation set in. The Varnak scientists scrambled to find any way to stop the plant, but they were out of options. Their technology, their weapons, everything they had built over millennia, was useless against this simple Earth organism. What had seemed like a harmless, almost laughable gift had turned into a nightmare. Hadrick managed to access one of the emergency consoles, sending out a distress signal to the Council. His message was brief, but filled with urgency. "Containment failure. The plant has breached all systems. It's consuming everything. We need help." The transmission was weak, the signal distorted by the interference caused by the plant's growth. But it was enough to alert the Council, who had ignored the warnings earlier. They had mocked Earth's gift, dismissing it as nothing more than a joke. But now, as the plant's influence spread across the planet, they were beginning to realize how wrong they had been. Outside the facility, the plant continued to spread, its tendrils reaching out, growing thicker with each passing moment. It wasn't just confined to the research complex anymore. It had begun to spread through the entire city. The Varnak's military, once confident in their superiority, were now fighting the losing battle. The plant was unstoppable. It consumed everything: metal, energy, even the very air itself, and it grew faster than anything they had ever encountered. As the Varnak soldiers retreated, realizing they were outmatched, the plant's growth only accelerated. The Empire, once the most powerful in the galaxy, was now facing its own destruction at the hands of an organism it had underestimated. The galaxy was about to learn that even the smallest, most insignificant things could hold unimaginable power. The Varnaks had made one fatal mistake. They had thought Earth's gift was harmless, but they were about to learn that even the simplest things could bring about the fall of an empire. The once proud Varnak's empire now stood on the brink of annihilation, a shadow of its former glory. The great city was no longer a symbol of advanced civilization. It had become a battleground between the determined forces of the Varnak's military and the unstoppable green mass that was consuming everything in its path. The plant, Florivermis primus, had grown beyond the research facility. It had spread across the city like wildfire, claiming everything it touched, and the Empire had no idea how to stop it. Hadric, the young scientist who had witnessed the plant's terrifying rise, found himself in the midst of a struggle for survival. After the initial containment breach, the Varnak's military had tried everything they could to stop the plant's rapid spread. They bombed its tendrils with energy blasts, they set up barriers, and they even deployed specially designed robots to attempt to break through the vines. But nothing worked. The plant seemed to absorb the energy, adapt to every attack, and grow even stronger. It was as if it had learned to fight back, to survive against all odds. Hadric, now one of the few surviving members of the original research team, had been trapped inside the city with his colleagues. The once bustling metropolis had become a ghost town, its streets eerily quiet except for the low rustling of the plant's tendrils. The green mass was everywhere, wrapping around buildings, twisting through the streets, and overtaking every structure it came in contact with. The Varnak's military had abandoned their posts, their weapons useless against the relentless hunger of the plant. The city was now in the hands of the green entity, and there seemed to be no way to stop it. The plant's hunger was insatiable. It absorbed everything: metal, energy, and even the moisture in the air. The tendrils grew thicker with every passing minute, moving like snakes, seeking out new sources of sustenance. They wrapped themselves around anything that could provide energy, feeding off the power grids, the factories, and the very heart of the city. What was once a thriving metropolis had become a shell, a city slowly being devoured from within. Hadric and his team had made their way to the city's central command center, hoping to find a solution, but the plant had anticipated their every move. The roots had already infiltrated the building, and the power had gone out completely. They were trapped. In the darkness, the survivors huddled together, their faces pale with fear. The once confident Varnak soldiers, who had once ruled over countless planets, were now broken, their spirits crushed by the overwhelming might of a plant they had underestimated. "We can't keep fighting it like this," one of them muttered, staring at the green mass that had claimed the city. "It's like it's learning from us." Hadric's mind raced. The plant wasn't just consuming the city, it was adapting. It wasn't just a mindless organism. It had evolved in ways they couldn't comprehend. And that terrified him. If it could adapt to the Varnak's environment, what was stopping it from spreading beyond the city? What would happen if it reached other planets? The plant had no natural predators here, and it seemed to be getting smarter with every passing moment. What if it's feeding off our mistakes? Hadric whispered, more to himself than anyone else. He had an idea, a terrifying one. What if the plant was learning how to feed off the very technology the Varnaks had used to try and contain it? Every time they attacked, every time they tried to destroy it, they only made it stronger. They were feeding its hunger with their own actions, unknowingly giving it more power. The team gathered around him, their faces filled with uncertainty. "What do you mean?" one of them asked. "I think it's adapting. Every energy blast, every missile, each attack is just making it more powerful. We've fed it with the very tools we use to fight it. What are we supposed to do then? Another scientist asked, his voice trembling. How do we stop it? Hadrick's mind raced through the data they had collected before the plant broke free. He had noticed something strange in the plant's structure. A unique signature in its DNA. It was as if the plant wasn't just an Earth organism. It had evolved in ways that shouldn't have been possible. The energy it absorbed didn't just feed it. It seemed to enhance its intelligence, its ability to grow exponentially. But could they use that against it? His eyes widened as an idea formed in his mind. There was one thing the Varnax hadn't tried. One weapon that might work. The plant had grown strong because of its ability to feed off energy, but what if it was vulnerable to the absence of energy? What if they could starve it? Without wasting another second, Hadrick made his decision. They needed to cut off the plant's source of power. They needed to create a blackout, something on a planetary scale that would starve the plant of the very energy it was feeding on. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was their only chance. The team, despite their fear and exhaustion, rallied around Hadrick's plan. They would have to access the central power grid and activate a planetary-wide blackout. It was risky, but it might just be the key to weakening the plant's hold on the city. If they could starve it, they might have a chance to stop it before it consumed everything. The survivors made their way through the darkened streets, the green tendrils reaching out like hungry fingers, trying to grab them. Every step was a struggle as the plant tried to block their path, its vines wrapping around anything in their way. The air was thick with the scent of the plant, an almost metallic odor that made their skin crawl. But they pressed on, knowing that if they failed, the entire planet would fall. As they reached the central power station, they found the entrance blocked by a massive wall of vines. The plant had already infiltrated the station, and the roots had spread into the control systems. But they didn't hesitate. Hadrick and his team set to work, using whatever tools they could find to cut through the vines. Time was running out, and every minute they wasted brought them closer to being overwhelmed. Finally, after what felt like hours, they managed to break through and access the control room. Hadrick rushed to the console, his fingers flying over the keys. He input the override codes, activating the planetary blackout. The power grid shut down, and for a moment, everything went still. The plant paused, its tendrils faltering as the energy that had fueled its growth vanished. But the plant wasn't done. It writhed in the darkness, trying to adapt, trying to find a new source of power. The struggle between Hadrick and the green hunger wasn't over yet, but for the first time, they had the upper hand. Outside, the city held its breath. Would the blackout be enough, or would the plant find a way to feed again? The countdown to the final battle had begun. The Varnax Empire's greatest enemy wasn't a rival empire or a hostile alien race. It was a plant, a simple Earth organism, grown beyond comprehension. The galaxy had always viewed Earth as insignificant, a small, isolated planet in a distant corner of the universe. No one took humanity seriously. And why should they? Earth's technology was primitive, its resources limited, and its civilization fragmented. But the people of Earth knew better. They had seen the signs, the warnings etched in the stars, and they had tried to send a message. But the galaxy ignored them. Now it was too late. Dr. Kiera Anders, a scientist who had spent years studying cosmic phenomena, had warned the Galactic Council about the looming threat. An ancient and powerful alien race, the Orcs, had been spotted moving towards the galaxy, their fleet growing in number with every passing day. The Orcs were known for their ruthless conquests, devouring entire planets and leaving nothing behind but ashes. But the Council had dismissed her warnings as paranoid ramblings. Earth has no place in galactic politics, they had said. You're just a small, unimportant planet. Kara's frustration had boiled over, but she refused to give up. She knew something was coming, something that would bring the galaxy to its knees, and the Council's arrogance would cost them dearly. With the help of a small group of like-minded individuals, Kiera had gathered evidence of the Orcs' approach and sent one final desperate message to the galaxy. The Morcs are coming. Prepare or face extinction. It wasn't long before the first signs of the Morcs' arrival appeared. The stars, once steady and predictable, began to flicker in the sky. Strange energy fluctuations were detected in the space around Earth, and then came the sudden, unexplained disappearances of nearby ships. But it was too late to warn the Council now. Earth was alone. Allies, ancient creatures who had been dormant for centuries, waiting for the right moment to awaken. Now, that moment had arrived. They were all coming, and Earth was their first target. Kira sat in her small lab, monitoring the communications that flickered on the screen in front of her. The warnings had gone unheeded, and now Earth was facing its darkest hour. Her heart sank as she watched the radar. The Morcs' fleet was heading straight for them, their ships like monstrous shadows against the stars. The Council still hadn't responded to the message she had sent, too busy with their own petty squabbles to pay attention to Earth's dire situation. Kira's only hope lay in the ancient technology hidden beneath the surface of the planet. Long ago, before humanity had even risen from the primordial waters, Earth had been visited by another alien race. They had left behind remnants of their advanced technology, hidden in deep, forgotten places. Only a few people knew of its existence, and Kira was one of them. But would it be enough? Would humanity's last defense stand against the Morcs? With urgency in her steps, Kira gathered a small team of trusted colleagues and set out to uncover the ancient technology. They traveled to a remote location, a desolate region where the Earth trembled with the weight of forgotten secrets. Deep beneath the surface, they found the entrance to an underground complex, its walls covered in alien symbols. The air was thick with dust and age, but the technology within was still intact. As Kira and her team navigated the labyrinthine corridors, they uncovered devices unlike anything humanity had ever seen. There were weapons of unimaginable power, energy sources that defied physics, and machines capable of manipulating the very fabric of space. But the most important discovery was a series of ancient star maps, showing the Morcs' path through the galaxy. The maps were incomplete, but they offered one critical piece of information. There was a weakness in the Morcs' fleet, a single vulnerable point where their ships were unprotected. But the map also showed something else. The Morcs were not coming alone. A dark realization struck Kira. The Morcs had awakened something else, something far older and more powerful than they had ever imagined. It was a force from the deepest corners of the galaxy, a power that could destroy everything in its path. And Earth had become its target. Time was running out. Kira and her team raced against the clock, hoping to unlock the secrets of the ancient technology in time to defend their planet. But as the days passed, the Morcs' fleet grew closer, and the planet trembled beneath the weight of their coming. The stars in the sky were no longer just lights. They were harbingers of doom, signaling the end of everything. The first attack came without warning. The Morcs unleashed a wave of energy that swept across the planet, disabling communication systems and sending shockwaves through the atmosphere. Kira watched in horror as cities crumbled, and the once proud nations of Earth were left in ruins. The human race, so sure of its place in the universe, had become nothing more than an afterthought to the galaxy, and now it was paying the price for its ignorance. As the chaos unfolded, Kira and her team worked feverishly, trying to activate the ancient technology. They had unlocked a few of the weapons, but it wasn't enough. The Morcs' fleet was too powerful, and the creatures they had awakened were relentless. Earth's defenses, small and outdated, stood no chance against the overwhelming might of their attackers. But then, in the darkest hour, Kira stumbled upon something she hadn't expected. Hidden deep within the ancient complex was a device unlike any other. It was a beacon, a signal emitter that could send a message across the galaxy. But this wasn't just any message. It was a signal that could amplify humanity's strength, calling upon other species who had once allied with Earth in the distant past. The message was simple: we will not fall. Kira knew that activating the beacon was a risk. If the message was sent, it could either rally other species to Earth's side or bring even more danger. But it was humanity's only hope. With trembling hands, Kiera initiated the signal. The beacon hummed to life, sending a pulse of energy into the depths of space. The stars themselves seemed to flicker in response. For a brief moment, Kiera held her breath, unsure of what would come next. The fate of the planet rested in the hands of the unknown. Days passed, and the Orcs continued their assault. The beacon's pulse had reached its destination, but would help arrive in time. Kiera's heart raced as she watched the skies above Earth. Then, without warning, a massive fleet of ships appeared, emerging from the darkness of space. They were not of Earth's making, but they were not enemies. These ships, the battle for Earth had begun. In the quiet corners of Earth, where civilization had long since given way to overgrown forests and forgotten cities, there was a legend of a flower. It wasn't just any flower. It was known as the last bloom. The stories passed down through generations whispered of its mystical properties, how it could heal the most grievous wounds and even grant the gift of life to the dying. But most dismissed it as myth, a story told to children to make them dream of a better world. Few believed the last bloom ever existed, until it did. It began with an unusual storm. It wasn't like the typical summer storms that swept across the land. This one was violent, unnatural in its intensity, as if the very air trembled under its force. The winds howled through the trees, and the sky seemed to crack open with thunder that echoed for miles. In the midst of this chaos, a single luminous flower appeared in the heart of the old, decaying city of Solace. Its petals shimmered with an ethereal glow, and it stood, impossibly vibrant, amid the decay. It was the last bloom. Clara, a scientist who had spent her life researching ancient Earth myths, was the first to hear the news. Her lab, located in the remains of an old university, was filled with maps and ancient texts. She had always been fascinated by the idea of lost civilizations and their forgotten wonders. She had read the stories of the last bloom as a child, but now, standing on the edge of adulthood, she never imagined those stories might be real. But the reports coming in were undeniable. The flower had been found. Clara was not alone in her obsession. There were others, less noble in their intentions, who also sought the flower. The ones who believed in its power and were willing to do anything to obtain it. They were known as the Black Thorn, a mercenary group that specialized in finding and taking rare artifacts. Led by the ruthless Captain Kale, the Black Thorn had no qualms about using violence to achieve their goals. The last bloom was not a legend to them. It was a prize. As Clara traveled to Solace, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The air was thick with tension, and the further she went, the more she felt it. The pull of something ancient and powerful, something she couldn't yet comprehend. The city was a ghost town, its once grand buildings now nothing more than crumbling skeletons of their former selves. But in the center of it all, where the city's grandest square once stood, there it was, the flower, glowing faintly in the evening light. Clara approached the last bloom cautiously, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel its power in the air, an energy that seemed to resonate with every fiber of her being. The petals shimmered, as if beckoning her to come closer. She reached out a hand, trembling with both excitement and fear. But before her fingers could touch the delicate petals, a voice rang out. "Stay back." Clara turned sharply to see a tall man stepping from the shadows. His face was cold and hard, his eyes narrowed with intent. It was Captain Kale. "I've been waiting for you," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "I knew someone like you would come. The question is, what do you think you can do with it?" Clara stood frozen, torn between fear and determination. She knew who he was and what he represented. Kale was not the type to let anyone take what he wanted. The Black Thorn had long ago learned to seize power at any cost, and the last bloom was no exception. "I'm not here to take it," Clara said, her voice steady despite the fear. "I'm here to understand it." to learn about it. Kale smirked. You think there's anything to understand. You think it's just a plant. Clara stepped forward, her eyes never leaving the flower. It's not just a plant. It's a link to something much greater. If we understand it, we might unlock the secrets of the universe. This flower, it's a key. Cal's expression darkened, his hand moving slowly toward the gun at his side. He had no interest in understanding anything. He wanted power. He wanted control. And if that meant destroying anyone who got in his way, so be it. I didn't come here for a lecture, he growled. I came here to take what's mine. Before Cal could draw his weapon, Clara made a split-second decision. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small vial filled with a clear liquid, something she had prepared for this moment. She tossed it toward the last bloom, and it shattered on the ground, releasing a soft, iridescent mist. The flower trembled, its petals closing briefly before opening wide once more, its glow intensifying. The ground beneath them rumbled, and a low hum filled the air, vibrating through their bodies. Clara's heart raced as she realized what she had done. The flower was reacting to the mist. It was alive in a way she hadn't anticipated. The last bloom was not just a plant. It was a sentient being, and it was calling out to something, or someone. Cal's eyes widened as the hum grew louder. The air around them seemed to warp, and for a brief moment, Clara could see something else, a figure in the mist, tall and otherworldly, glowing with the same light as the flower. It's not just a flower, Clara whispered in awe. It's a guardian, a protector. Before Cal could respond, the figure in the mist solidified, revealing an ancient being, its body made of shimmering light and its face unreadable. It was neither man nor machine, but something in between. Clara knew, instinctively, that this being was not of Earth. It had come from somewhere else, summoned by the bloom. You dare to disturb the last bloom? The being asked, its voice like 1,000 whispers. It wasn't a question, it was a command. Cale took a step back, fear creeping into his eyes. We were only. The being's eyes flickered with a fierce light, and Cale was silenced. Clara, however, felt a strange sense of peace. The being had not come to harm her. It had come to protect. I will not allow it to fall into the wrong hands, the being said, its voice filled with an ancient power. The last bloom is the heart of life itself, and those who seek to corrupt it will never succeed. Clara took a deep breath, her mind racing. This was no ordinary flower. It was more than just a mythical object. It was the last of its kind, and it carried within it the power to reshape the future. The figure turned its gaze to Clara, and for a moment, the world seemed to pause. You, it said softly, you are the one chosen to protect it, to carry its legacy forward. Cale, still recovering from the encounter, lunged forward, but before he could reach the flower, the being raised a hand. A blast of light shot out, sending him flying backward. He crumpled to the ground, unconscious, as the flower's glow intensified. Clara stepped forward slowly, her heart racing, as she knelt before the last bloom. It was hers to protect now. And with it, the fate of Earth, and perhaps the galaxy, rested on her shoulders.